There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Well, hello, BookTube. I'm Sean the Book Maniac, and I am so excited to tell you my TBR for a brand new readathon in 2021. It is called the 1900 to 1950 Readathon. Very simple title, and so that's what it is. It's organized by Katie of Books and Things, and when I saw her announcement video, which of course I will link in the show notes, it completely upended my plans for May. It's for the entire month of May, and I already was planning to do, and still will do, 2 other readathons in May. The Asian Readathon, although I have not seen any official confirmation that the Asian Readathon is happening in 2021, I'm assuming it is, or I'm going to be reading some Asian books anyway, and Springathon. But when I found out about the 1900 to 1950 Readathon, it's like, oh my god, this is my period. Everything that was published after 1950 is pretty much crap. I think we can all agree, especially new releases. So the 1900 to 1950 period is where all the good writing happened. So I am going to go absolutely nuts with this readathon. I am planning to read 10 books. Now, I'm not fussy about finishing all the books by the end of May. That doesn't matter to me, but I'm planning to start them all in May. 10 books for the 1900 to 1950 readathon, plus much shorter TBRs for the other 2, Springathon and Asian Readathon. So I am going to tell you now about my 10 books. I'm going to give them to you in chronological order. Katie has some great prompts. I might end up fulfilling some of them by accident, but I like her bonus challenge, read a book from every decade of the period, and I have those covered in my 10. I think I will also be able to, I'm going to be doing read a book published in the country you're from, which would be Canada, no problem. Number 2, from a different country, definitely. Genre classic, no thank you. Something that isn't a novel, I have one as a backup that it would fit, but not in my 10. And number 5, set during or exploring World War I or World War II. I actually don't know much about the plots of the books I'm planning to read, but I'm sure at least one of them will cover off that. So I'll be accidentally doing several of the challenges, but definitely hitting the bonus challenge. So without further ado, here are the 10, and then I have some backups because I'm a notorious bailer, but I am definitely going to try these 10 in May. Hey, well, it's not quite math, but it's kind of like math, and I suck at math, so after I filmed the entire video, several hours afterwards, I realized I didn't have one for every decade from 1900 to 1950. I'd completely missed 1900 to 1909. So I want to be a completist about the bonus prompt. So I am also going to do, on audio, The Wizard of Oz by Frank Baum, published 1900. So that will take care of that, so that I can still do the other 10. So let's get back to what I filmed before. This is one that I found at a used bookstore here in Tokyo 3 or 4 years ago. It's quite a new reprinted book, originally published in 1913. I'd never heard of the author, certainly not of the book, and I'm finally going to give it a try. And that is Sleeping Waters by John Trevena, 1913. John Trevena is the pseudonym of Ernest Henham, born 1870, died 1946, an English author. He published melodramatic popular novels as a young man before he moved to Dartmoor for his health, and then he reinvented himself as John Trevena, and according to the back, he was regarded as one of the finest novelists of his time, and I've never heard of him on maybe a bit of over-promotion on the back cover. And this is the 100th anniversary edition of Sleeping Waters. I love the cover. It is about a burnt-out Catholic priest, and he's burnt out from ministering to the poor in the slums of London, travels to a remote village in Dartmoor to recover his health, and it goes from there. I don't know if it's any good, but I've been dying to try it since I bought it, and now I shall. And here is a gay novel from 1919 from America. Bertram Cope's Year by Henry Blake Fuller. I love the cover. I've had it sitting on my shelf for several years, and I'm going to end up repeating that phrase So I'm going to declare a moratorium from now on in this TBR video. I'm excited to get to it, and it has several homosexual characters who are revolving around an English professor. I don't know if that's literal. In a middle western university town patterned on Evanston, Illinois. Fuller was 62 years old when he published it in 1919. He couldn't get it published by an actual publisher, and then he was so discouraged by the lack of interest in the book after he self-published it, and kind of maybe homophobic, but certainly confused reviews of it, that he burned all the extra copies and didn't publish another novel for a decade. So he was published this when he was 62. Yeah, I'm just curious about it. Looking forward to giving it a try. I read a ton of short fiction in 2020, and the best short story that I read was the famous Virginia Woolf story, The Mark on the Wall, which apparently was the first short story she ever had published, and that was maybe in around 1917. She never wrote all that many short stories, but because I loved that story, The Mark on the Wall, so much, I picked this up. The Mark on the Wall and Other Stories. It's an Oxford classic. This is a modern compilation. The first 8 stories, including The Mark on the Wall, were published in 1921 in her short story collection, Monday or Tuesday. And the maybe the others, I don't know how many stories there are, maybe a dozen or more, were just published in journals or whatever, I don't know. I didn't go any further into the introduction. That was enough for me. So I'm counting this as the 1921, but it was never published in this particular collection until modern times, but they were all written, obviously, in the first half of the 20th century. I can't wait. And from 1927, here is a classic of modern Welsh literature that I've had on my shelf for a little while, The Withered Root by Rhys Davies. Rhys Davies was I don't know how openly gay, he was at least a closeted gay writer. I don't know that he ever wrote gay themes, and probably not in 1927. It's about the last great Welsh revival, a religious thrust of feeling, chapels and coal mines, righteous fervor, and fertile febrile carousal, which swept across Wales in 1904. Yeah, Welsh literature, it's a real challenge to me because there's a lot of religious mumbo-jumbo in Welsh literature, but if it's tempered with fertile carousal, I should be okay. I have read I think it was maybe published in 1945, a little book that he wrote about Wales, and I don't think it's still in print. I bought a copy that was maybe a first edition for like $3 or something, and I read it, and it was beautifully written, and I learned so much about Wales from Rhys Davies's little book, probably just called Wales. I'll put a link to it in the show notes because, yeah, it's wonderful. So this will be my first novel. Last year, Mel and Britta had a Read More German Books 2020 reading challenge, which I did. It was a year-long reading challenge, and I read quite a few German novels and short story collections, but I acquired more than I read, as usual. I bit off more than I could chew. So this is another chance to go back to one of those, and that is Berlin Alexanderplatz by Alfred Doblin, translated from the German by Michael Hoffman. Chunky novel, published in 1929, described as the great novel of Berlin and the doomed Weimar Republic. If it's half as good as its cover, I will be pleased. Here is a Persephone book that I've had on my shelf forever, and I'm finally going to get to it. Diary of a Provincial Lady by E.M. Delafield, which was published in 1930. It's time. People say, Sean, you're going to love it. People have been telling me, bookish people have been telling me since the book was published, they've been telling me, Sean, it's such a Sean book. Read it. So even though it's got this ugly gray cover, I'm finally going to give it a try. The fabulous bookmark that came with my used copy, that's also from a Persephone Books bookmark, does go a long way to compensating for the dull gray cover. Look at that bookmark. And it is a fictional diary, and I believe Roz of Scallydandling About the Books told me that it was kind of an answer to another novel in the form of a diary, and I've forgotten what that novel was. But anyway, this one, apparently, I'm gonna love. I'll let you know. This one, I'm not sure it was published, but it was certainly written in 1931. I think it was only very recently published. Zora Neale Hurston's last book to be ever published, just a year or two ago. I haven't researched it recently, so I will tell you all about it when I get to it. But it's Barracoon, the story of the last black cargo. She interviewed one of the last remaining enslaved African Americans that was still alive in the late 1920s or early 1930s, and wrote a book about it. I don't know that it was published at the time. Maybe it was published. I mean, went out of print for decades and came back into print. I'm not sure, but it was written in 1931, so as far as I'm concerned, it qualifies. Zora Neale Hurston is the goddess, and I've never read this. Oh, so that actually counts. I've forgotten. I have already covered another genre. This is nonfiction. Great. This will be a double dip because this will also be part of my Asian Readathon TBR, a Chinese novel from 1937, Rickshaw Boy by Lao She, translated from the Chinese by Howard Goldblatt. It's a story of an honest and serious country boy who works as a rickshaw puller in Beijing. Yeah, sounds fabulous. So my penultimate pick is another gay novel from Britain, published in 1943. Denton Welch's debut novel, Maiden Voyage, which I have as an ebook. I have read two other novels by Denton Welch, and they are some of the finest works of fiction that I've read from the mid-20th century. Such a beautiful gay sensibility in the stories, and I love the story of Denton Welch's life and the way that he dealt with being handicapped from a terrible bike accident when he was maybe 20, which shortened his life. I think he died in 1948, maybe, and he was maybe 40, maybe 38, but he'd never really he'd had terrible trouble from the accident when he was maybe 20, and wrote beautiful works of literature and was a painter. And this is his debut, which I've never read. And much closer to home, I grew up in Saskatchewan, and this is the Saskatchewan classic. It's probably there might be only one other work of fiction published in Saskatchewan that was considered a Canadian classic. But this one is from 1947, and that is Who Has Seen the Wind by W.O. Mitchell. Mitchell was born in Saskatchewan. The story is set in small-town Saskatchewan, but he lived most of his adult life, the last half of his life, in Calgary, Alberta, which is the adjoining province. I don't even remember if I've read this. It was made into a movie in the 1970s, and I remember the movie quite vividly. One of the reasons is because I was not in high school in the 1970s. I was very much of an elementary school student, but the high school French teacher in my little rinky-dink town played one of the minor characters in the film. So everybody was so excited because of that, and I can't remember if I ever read the novel, but I'm going to read it or maybe reread it for this readathon. It's entirely possible that I didn't count right, but I think that's 10, so that's what I'm going to definitely start reading next month. Here, in much less detail, I'm just going to basically show you the book and give you a sentence or two about the backups I have, the alternates, the pile of possibilities. And I'm not going to give them to you in chronological order. This is a Brazilian novel originally published in 1934 and recently reissued in English by NYRB Books. Sal Bernardo by Graciliano Ramos, translated from the Portuguese by Padma Viswanathan. I read another novel by Ramos a few years ago, quite liked it. It's a short little one. Here's an Irish novel originally published in 1931, Mad Puppets Town by M.J. Farrell, a.k.a. Molly Keane. This British novel from 1933, Frost in May by Antonia White. I think I bought it last year because the backlisted podcast, it was one of their selections, and I'd never heard of it, so I bought it. And of course, Howard's End by E.M. Forster. I read it maybe 20 years ago. Don't remember much about it except that I liked it. Would like to reread it. Another 1931 novel by the French writer Jean Giono, To the Slaughterhouse. Now, this one is very much about World War I. I found out about this writer, and I think this novel, in Edmund White's reader memoir, The Unpunished Vice, and I bought it because of that. And it is translated from the French by Norman Glass. This is another Canadian classic. In other words, nobody that you or I know has ever read it. When was it published? 1933. Frederick P. Grove's Fruits of the Earth. Now, I studied one of Grove's novels as an undergrad, and I can't remember if it was this one or not. The plots, it sounds like it could be, but I don't remember. I loved that novel, but I don't remember if it was this title or not. Frederick P. Grove's biography is fascinating because he was a bit of a con artist. He had a fake identity, and I think he was actually German, and he concealed his real identity from the world, and it's fascinating. But his writing is really good. He writes about prairie homesteading stories, and that's what this one is. And finally, another Canadian one. This is a book of feminist polemics, perhaps feminist essays, by the Canadian feminist activist and writer, novelist, Nellie McClung, In Times Like These. And she died in 1951. This was written in 1915. So that, and I mean, I have probably 50 other books here that were published between 1900 and 1950. I'm so excited about this one. You should get your own TBR going, people. It's going to be fun. It's about time we all read some quality literature instead of all these silly new releases, don't you think? Thanks for watching.